Um, the vow that I think these Buddhists were talking about was the fifth precept, not to take drugs which cloud the mind. I don't believe psychedelics are drugs that cloud the mind. But my work is not to do with whether it is appropriate for Buddhists to take psychedelic drugs. Not at all. There are books on this, like there is a book called Zigzag Zen, which actually cites my work and gets it wrong. I couldn't, because the guy that interviewed me was drunk at the time. But I would complain, but the poor bugger died of cancer a few months later, so nothing I can do about Zigzag Zen. But anyway, that's not the thrust of my research at all. What I am interested in is the evidence for the historical use of psychedelics within Hinduism and Buddhism, and I have uncovered copious evidence for the use of psychedelics within Buddhism in the basically what we might call the Middle Ages, from about the 5th century, certainly to around 1300, and there it gets a bit hazy and maybe becomes a lot more secret or just disappears. I don't know. But let me get some bearings first. How many of you are familiar with Buddhism? Do we have some hands? Yeah, okay. How many of you are familiar with Vajrayana Buddhism? I see I've got some explaining to do. Okay. We're often told there are two main schools of Buddhism, Hinayana Buddhism, or some people confuse it with Theravada Buddhism, but I won't go into that. And Mahayana Buddhism. These are the lesser vehicle and the great vehicle. But there is a subset of Mahayana Buddhism called Vajrayana. Vajrayana means the thunderbolt vehicle, although it's never really explained why it's called that. So the Vajrayana is very peculiar in that it has lots of deities, for one thing, and it has lots of rituals. These are not present in Hinayana Buddhism, only slightly present in Mahayana. In Mahayana we do find bodhisattvas, like these kind of spiritual entities which by, I guess, most Buddhist practitioners consider them to be rather like saints or angels or something, but if you actually get into the scriptures and read about them, they're described as psychological processes, archetypes, that kind of... I think archetype would be the closest in the Western. The closest the West has to these kind of deities. But although we might find a dozen or so bodhisattvas in Mahayana Buddhism, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of deities found in Vajrayana. I have an interest in iconography, which is one of the reasons that I came up with, I uncovered a lot of this stuff from the iconography. And I have a complete set of the Dictionary of Buddhist Iconography by Professor Lokesh Chandra. It's in 15 volumes, and it's remarkable how many deities there are. Where did they all come from, and what are they all about? Well, I found that not all of them are archetypes. Some of them seem to represent plants, in particular mushrooms. And I have to explain that this is Photoshop. This is me. I took that. There is a statue of an Arhat, a disciple of the Buddha. This statue is in the Newark Museum of Art in New Jersey, and that's a photograph of Psilocybe cubensis, which just happened to fit perfectly into his hand. I was trying to make the point of the similarity between the bump on the top of the mushroom and the bump on the top of his head, which is called the Ushnisha, and I'll get back to that later. Well, another question. How many people are familiar with the Vedas? Right, a little bit. Okay, one or two people a little bit. Okay, the oldest scripture still in use in the world is called the Rig Veda. This is a set of verses that were chanted at a particular ceremony, a fire sacrifice, by Indo-European invaders into India. They arrived about 2500 BC. They called themselves Aryans. Hitler took that term from them. Hitler's version of it was totally different. These people meant noble or civilized or hospitable when they said Aryan. But they spoke a language related to ours, English or Farsi, or it's an Indo-European language. And so these verses which were chanted at a fire ceremony, where first of all they sacrificed an animal, and they had this fire on a hearth made of 108 bricks shaped like a bird, and in the ceremony they made a drug. During the ceremony they took a plant of some kind, it's never specified exactly what it is, and they ground it between two stones, adding water or milk. Then they filtered it through sheep's wool into a large bowl called a sagara, or ocean. Sagara means ocean. And they then offered a cup of it to the flames of the fire, giving it to the gods, and they drank the rest themselves, and got high. And they ended in freestyle rapping. This is seriously. They had a kind of cutting contest where they were topping each other with their freestyle raps. So around 1000 BC, the drug became hard to get. We know this from a set of commentaries on the Vedas called the Brahmanas. And in the Aitareya Brahmana, it gives instructions on on the first part, gives instructions on how to conduct yourself when dealing with the dope dealer. The drug, by the way, was known as soma, which means juice. It means something which is squeezed out from the Sanskrit root su, meaning to press or squeeze. So it had lots of other names. They called it Shukra, Sukla, Amrita. So Amrita is the important one. We're going to dwell on that later. Amrita means immortality. So it was the elixir of immortality. And it was what kept the gods immortal. The gods drank soma to make them immortal. So, around 1000 BC, whatever soma was became hard to get. The early versions of the early verses in the Brahmanas tell you how to deal with the indigenous people, not the Aryans. They were others. They were the outside the pale of the Aryan civilization, but you needed them because they had the drugs. And so there's the description of the ritual of how you buy your drugs. You put a cowhide, of a red and white cow. You put the hide down, and red and white. It's significant because it is thought that one of the there are lots of ideas about what soma was. One of the more convincing theories is that it was the fly agaric mushroom, Amanita muscaria, which is red with white spots on it. So during this description of how you conduct yourself when you're making the drug deal, there are repeated injunctions not to trust the drug dealer. It says repeatedly, beware, the drug dealer is a cheat. The soma seller is a thief. The soma seller is despicable, throughout. And then you get to later chapters on the Brahmana. And it no longer talks about, dealing with these pani, or pani is the word that they used for these non-Aryan people, one of the non-Aryan peoples that you dealt with. And instead, it starts saying, use this substitute for soma, use that substitute. This is an acceptable substitute, this one is not an acceptable substitute. So obviously, if they were talking about getting substitutes, this was disappearing. So this is possibly just that they were getting cut off from their supplies of Amanita muscaria, possibly because the climate change was killing the forests, and these things only grow in association with certain trees. They're mycorrhizal. The mycelium has a symbiotic relationship with the roots of certain trees. So